Naomi Vance had learned to measure her life in losses. Lost gallery emails that never came. Lost commissions that went to someone else. Lost sleep from hunger she pretended was discipline. Her studio apartment smelled of turpentine and damp concrete, a sharp, unforgiving scent that clung to her clothes and hair no matter how often she washed them. The place was barely large enough to stretch her arms without brushing against something unfinished, half-painted canvases leaning against cracked walls, sketchbooks stacked like evidence of dreams that refused to die. Every surface told the same story. Trying. Failing. Trying again anyway. Her hands were stained with paint in colors she could no longer remember choosing, deep blues embedded under her fingernails, streaks of ochre smeared across her knuckles. No amount of scrubbing ever truly removed them. It was as if her body itself had accepted what the world had not. She was an artist. And no one cared. Pinned to the center of her easel was the eviction notice. The paper was thin. The ink was red. The words were brutally simple. Final warning. Naomi stared at it longer than she should have, her mind doing quiet, desperate calculations. What could she sell? What could she carry? How long could she sleep on Isla's couch before overstaying her welcome? She was still standing there when the light in the room changed. A shadow stretched across the floor, long, deliberate, out of place. She turned. He hadn't knocked. Men like Dante Sterling never did. He stood in her doorway as though he belonged there, tall and composed, dressed in a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it looked poured onto him rather than worn. The fabric alone probably cost more than everything Naomi owned combined. The air shifted around him. Not loudly. Not violently. Just, decisively. He didn't glance around the room with the familiar mix of pity and disinterest she had grown accustomed to from gallery scouts and art critics. He didn't wince at the clutter or the peeling paint. He looked. Really looked. His eyes moved slowly across the canvases, lingering on faces that had never been seen by anyone important. His gaze didn't skim, he dissected. Studied. As if he were reading something written beneath the paint itself. Naomi's pulse hammered. She braced herself for the inevitable dismissal. The polite smile. The rehearsed rejection. It never came. Naomi Vance, he said. Not as a question. As a certainty. Her breath caught. I've been looking for you. The words made no sense. No one looked for her. People overlooked her. Stepped around her. Forgot her. He told her he wanted to commission a series of paintings. Not one. A series. He named a figure so impossibly high her mind rejected it outright. It sounded like a misprint. A joke. Something meant for other people's lives. It wasn't just money. It was escape. It was survival. It was everything. Naomi didn't ask why. She didn't ask how he found her. She didn't ask what he wanted beyond the art. Desperation has a way of silencing instinct, and instinct was screaming, but hunger screamed louder. She said yes. What she couldn't have known, what no one had warned her, was that Dante Sterling hadn't chosen her by accident. She wasn't a muse. She wasn't a miracle. She was a piece on a board that had been set decades before she was born. And the game he was playing would cost her far more than her poverty ever had. Because the man who lifted her from nothing wasn't offering salvation. He was setting the stage. And the betrayal that would destroy her wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the one person she trusted more than anyone else in the world. Welcome to Storyheart Studio, where love collides with power, and betrayal always leaves a scar. If stories like this pull you in, subscribe and stay with us. You're exactly where you belong. Dante Sterling didn't apologize for the intrusion. He didn't even acknowledge it. He stepped fully into the apartment as though crossing an invisible threshold that had already been cleared for him. The door clicked shut behind him with a soft, final sound that made Naomi's pulse jump. Up close, he was even more imposing. Not loud. Not aggressive. Controlled. Everything about him felt intentional, the precise cut of his suit, the polished leather of his shoes, the stillness in his posture. He was the kind of man who didn't need to announce his power because the world had already learned to bend around it. Naomi wiped her paint-stained hands on her jeans without thinking, suddenly acutely aware of how small her life looked under his scrutiny. He stopped in front of one of her canvases, a portrait she'd almost thrown out the night before. A woman with hollow eyes and a mouth half open, caught between a scream and a confession. Dante tilted his head slightly. "You don't paint what people want to see," he said at last. The words weren't a criticism. They were an observation. "No one ever does," Naomi replied, her voice steadier than she felt. A faint flicker crossed his eyes, interest sharpening into something deeper. He turned to face her fully then, and for the first time, she noticed how unreadable his expression was. Not cold. Just guarded. Like a vault that had learned long ago the cost of being open. "I'm not interested in decoration," Dante said. "I'm interested in truth." He explained the commission with the same calm precision he might use to outline a corporate acquisition. A private series. Complete creative freedom. No deadlines designed to break her. No interference in her process. And then the number. Naomi actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that escaped her before she could stop it. "That's not possible," she said. Dante didn't smile. "It is," he replied. "And it's yours, if you want it." If she wanted it. As though anyone in her position would hesitate. Still, something about the offer felt unreal, like stepping onto a bridge made of fog. Her instincts, dulled but not dead, whispered questions she was afraid to ask. Why her? Why now? Why so much? Instead, she asked the safest thing she could think of. Why me? His gaze held hers for a long, quiet moment. When he finally spoke, his answer was maddeningly simple. Because you see what others refuse to. It wasn't an explanation. It was a deflection dressed as a compliment. Before she could press further, he continued, already moving past the question as though it had been settled. You'll need a different space, he said, glancing around the apartment. Better light. Better tools. This place isn't designed for the work you're capable of. The casual certainty in his tone unsettled her. No one had ever spoken about her potential as if it were a fact rather than a possibility. I'll arrange everything, he added. You'll move within 48 hours. Naomi stiffened. I didn't agree to that. For the first time, Dante paused. He looked at her, not like a benefactor now, but like a man reassessing a variable he hadn't accounted for. Then we'll discuss alternatives, he said smoothly. But the commission remains. I don't withdraw offers. That should have reassured her. Instead, it made her uneasy. He handed her a card, thick, matte black, his name embossed in silver. No address. No tagline. Just a phone number. When you're ready, he said. Ready for what, he didn't specify. At the door, he stopped and glanced back once more at the eviction notice pinned to her easel. His eyes lingered on it for half a second. I dislike wasted talent, he said quietly. And I dislike inefficiency even more. Then he was gone. The apartment felt smaller without him. Too quiet. Naomi sank onto a stool, card clenched in her hand, heart racing. She told herself this was luck. A miracle. A once-in-a-lifetime break. She didn't let herself consider the alternative. That men like Dante Sterling never did anything without a purpose. And that she had just agreed to step into a world where purpose often came with a price. Isla Hart didn't answer the phone. She screamed into it. Naomi, oh my God, are you serious? Isla's voice was a breathless rush of disbelief and excitement, the kind that made people on the street turn to stare. A billionaire? An actual, reclusive, terrifyingly rich billionaire just walked into your apartment and offered you a commission? Naomi pulled the phone away from her ear and winced. Lower your voice. My walls are thin, and my neighbors already think I'm unstable. That's because you are unstable, Isla shot back, laughing. Unstable and about to be discovered. This is it. This is your moment. They'd been like this for years, two art students clinging to each other through critique rooms that tore them apart and rejection emails that arrived with ruthless regularity. Isla had always been the louder one, the optimist, the fighter. Where Naomi retreated inward, Isla charged ahead. A man like that doesn't just find people by accident, Isla continued. You realize this, right? He chose you. The word chosen made Naomi uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite articulate. He didn't say why, she said carefully. Isla scoffed. He doesn't have to. You're talented. Brilliant, actually. The world is just slow to catch up. Naomi smiled despite herself. Isla had always believed in her with an almost frightening intensity. It was comforting, dangerously so. I think he's going to move me, Naomi added. He wants a different space. A better studio. Isla gasped. Stop. You're joking. I'm not. Oh my God, Isla whispered. You're living inside a fairy tale. That word again. Fairy tale. It followed Naomi like a ghost over the next few days. Dante's people moved with clinical efficiency. Contracts were signed. Logistics arranged. Boxes labeled and carried away by strangers who handled her things with careful indifference. Within 48 hours, her old apartment was empty. No more paint-splattered floors. No more cracked windows. No more eviction notice pinned to her easel. The loft was nothing like anywhere she had ever lived. It rose high above the city, wrapped in glass and steel, flooded with light that poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows. The studio space alone was larger than her entire previous apartment. Professional-grade canvases lined one wall. Shelves of pristine paints gleamed under soft lighting. The air smelled clean, almost sterile. Naomi stood in the center of it all, feeling suddenly small. For the first time in her life, she had everything she'd ever wanted. And she didn't know where to put herself inside it. Isla visited that evening, circling the space with wide eyes. You could host a gallery opening in here, she breathed. Naomi, this is insane. It doesn't feel real, Naomi admitted. That's because you're not used to winning, Isla said lightly, but there was something sharp beneath the joke. Don't overthink it. Just enjoy it. Dante arrived later that night. Not with flowers. Not with fanfare. Just with quiet certainty. This space will work, he said, surveying the room. If you need anything altered, tell me. Not ask. Tell. Naomi nodded, unsure why the distinction mattered. As Isla prepared to leave, she squeezed Naomi's hands tightly. Don't forget about me when you're famous, she joked. I knew you before the penthouse. Naomi laughed and hugged her. I could never forget you. And she meant it. She had no idea that the person who cheered the loudest at her miracle would one day be the one to poison it. Because while Naomi was learning how to live inside a dream, something else was beginning to grow quietly in the shadows. Something that had nothing to do with fairy tales. And everything to do with envy. Dante Sterling did not hover. He did not interrupt. He did not offer suggestions. He simply watched. Naomi noticed it first on the third day in the loft. She had been working for hours, lost in the familiar rhythm of brush against canvas, when she became aware of the weight of his presence behind her. He sat in one of the leather chairs near the windows, posture relaxed, hands loosely folded, his attention fixed entirely on her work. Not on her, on the painting itself. It was unsettling. Most people watched artists the way they watched performances, waiting for something impressive to happen. Dante watched like a man studying a language he intended to master. She tried to ignore him. Tried to pretend her pulse hadn't picked up, that her movements weren't suddenly more deliberate. But every time she reached for a new color, she felt his gaze following the decision. "You don't need to perform," he said quietly, without looking away from the canvas. "I'm not your audience." That only made it worse. As the days passed, the silence between them grew dense, charged with things neither of them named. When he spoke, it was precise. When he listened, it was absolute. At night, the silence broke. Dante was different after dark. The man who dominated boardrooms and moved companies like chess pieces shed his armor in private. He touched her as though she were something fragile and rare, as though he were afraid she might vanish if he held her too tightly. Slowly the line between them began to blur. There were moments, rare but real, when he let his guard slip. A flicker of exhaustion. A distant look in his eyes that spoke of battles fought long before she entered his life. Naomi learned not to ask. The one time she did, she learned why. They were standing by the window, the city glowing beneath them like a living thing, when a news segment mentioned Marcus Thorne. Dante froze. Not figuratively. Physically. The change in him was immediate and terrifying. His jaw locked so hard she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. His hand curled into a fist at his side. "Who is that?" Naomi asked carefully. Dante didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, controlled, and sharp enough to cut. "Thorn is a disease," he said. "A parasite that's been feeding on my family for decades." Naomi swallowed. "And you?" "I am the cure." There was no bravado in his words. Only certainty. That night, Naomi lay awake long after Dante had fallen asleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She told herself everyone had a past. She told herself love meant accepting the darkness as well as the light. What she didn't realize was that she had stepped into the space between a man and his vengeance. And no one ever stood there without paying the price. Naomi tried to forget the way Dante's voice had changed when he said Marcus Thorne's name. She buried herself in her work instead, letting color and form absorb her thoughts. During the day, the loft filled with light and motion, the quiet hum of creation almost convincing her that the tension she felt was imagined. Almost. But names like Marcus Thorne didn't disappear once spoken. They lingered. So she asked Isla. They met at a small cafe tucked between two old buildings, the kind of place that smelled permanently of burnt coffee and desperation. Isla arrived late, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, eyes already scanning the room out of habit. Freelance journalism had taught her caution. When Naomi mentioned Thorne, Isla stopped mid-step. Her smile faded. "That's not a name you bring up lightly," Isla said, sliding into the chair across from her. "What did Dante tell you?" "Not much," Naomi admitted. "Just that he hates him." Isla let out a humorless laugh. "Hate doesn't even begin to cover it." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "The Sterlings and the Thorns have been circling each other for generations. Old money, new money, it doesn't matter. When they collide, people get crushed." Naomi's stomach tightened. "What happened?" Isla hesitated, then sighed. Dante's father ran Sterling Industries before him. Brilliant man. Trusted the wrong people. Thorne orchestrated a hostile takeover so clean it looked legal on paper. Publicly, it was just business. Privately, it destroyed him. She paused. He lost the company. His reputation. Most of his allies. There were rumors, mental breakdowns, addictions, things no one could prove. The man disappeared from public life not long after. Naomi felt cold. And Thorn? He built an empire on the wreckage, Isla said bluntly. Everything Dante has now? It's because he clawed his way back from that ruin. And he's never forgiven the man who caused it. The words settled heavily between them. You need to stay out of it, Isla said firmly. You're an artist, Naomi. Not a shield. Not a weapon. Don't let yourself get pulled into something that existed long before you. Naomi nodded. She even meant it. But when she returned to the loft that night and found Dante standing by the window, city lights reflecting in his eyes like distant fires, she knew the warning had come too late. The feud wasn't something happening around him. It was something living inside him. And she was already too close to the flame. Naomi didn't mean to find it. That was the lie she told herself later, when everything had already begun to fall apart. The truth was simpler, and more dangerous. She was curious. Dante's study was a study in control. Every book aligned. Every surface pristine. Nothing out of place. It felt less like a room someone lived in and more like a mind carefully organized to avoid chaos. She had been looking for a reference book on industrial architecture, something to inspire the series, when her fingers brushed the edge of his desk. There was a seam. So faint she almost missed it. She pressed. A soft click echoed in the quiet room, and a hidden compartment slid open. Naomi's breath caught. Inside was a single folder. Thick. Heavy. Meticulously organized. Her name wasn't on it. Marcus Thorne's was. Photographs spilled across the polished wood, grainy surveillance shots, time-stamped and catalogued. Financial documents. Legal briefs annotated in Dante's precise handwriting. Psychological profiles that stripped a man down to patterns and weaknesses. This wasn't preparation. It was fixation. Her chest tightened as understanding crept in. Dante wasn't just reacting to the past. He was reliving it. That night, the city erupted. News alerts flashed across every screen. One of Thorne Consolidated's largest subsidiaries had collapsed overnight. Stock values plummeted. Billions evaporated. Naomi watched Dante as the news played on the massive screen in the living area. He stood motionless. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply watched. And in that stillness, she saw something that frightened her far more than rage ever could. Satisfaction. Cold. Controlled. Earned. How could you do this? She asked later, her voice unsteady. People lost everything. Jobs. Pensions. Dante turned to her slowly. They lost what Thorne taught them to value, he said. Money. Power. Illusions. That doesn't make it right. No, he agreed quietly. But it makes it necessary. The distance between them yawned wide and deep. Naomi realized then that she hadn't just fallen in love with a man. She had fallen into a war. And she was standing far too close to the blast radius. If your heart is racing right now, tap the like button and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps these stories find the people who feel them as deeply as you do. Thank you. Isla came the next afternoon. She didn't text first. She didn't call. She showed up at the loft unannounced, her expression carefully arranged into concern before Naomi even opened the door. I need to talk to you, Isla said softly, stepping inside as though the words themselves were fragile. It's important. Naomi was already raw from the night before. From the argument. From the realization that the man she loved was capable of things she didn't understand, and maybe never would. What's wrong? She asked. Isla hesitated. Just long enough to make it convincing. I didn't want to say anything, she began, folding her arms as if bracing herself. But I've been digging into Dante. Not for a story, don't look at me like that. For you. Naomi's stomach tightened. Digging into him how? Isla sighed. The way I dig into anyone with that much power. Quietly. Carefully. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder, worn at the edges like it had been handled many times. She placed it on the table between them but didn't open it yet. Naomi, Isla said gently, he didn't choose you because of your art. The words landed softly, and cut deep. What do you mean? I mean he's been watching you for years, Isla continued. Not because of who you are. But because of who you're connected to. Naomi felt dizzy. That's not possible. Your grandfather, Isla pressed on. The land he owned on the east side, the one you told me about in school? The one everyone said was worthless? Naomi nodded slowly. Thorne needs it for a development project, Isla said. He can't get it cleanly. But you? She swallowed. You're the missing piece. The leverage. Naomi shook her head. No. Dante wouldn't. He would, Isla interrupted quietly. And he did. She opened the folder. Inside were documents. Emails. Contracts filled with legal language Naomi barely understood, but enough familiar words leapt out to make her heart stutter. Property. Acquisition. Vance. He planned to seduce you, Isla said, her voice steady and controlled. To earn your trust. To use you to strike the final blow against Marcus Thorne. Naomi's chest burned. Every shared glance. Every touch. Every whispered promise. All of it reassembled itself into something ugly and manipulative. I didn't want to believe it either, Isla said softly. But you deserve the truth. The room felt like it was tilting. That night, Naomi confronted Dante. The loft, once a sanctuary, felt like a courtroom. Was I just a pawn? She demanded, her voice breaking despite her effort to keep it steady. Was any of it real? Dante stared at her, genuine confusion flashing across his face. Naomi, what are you talking about? She threw the folder at him. Don't lie to me, she said, tears spilling freely now. I trusted you. He opened it. Read. And then something shifted. The confusion drained from his face, replaced by something far more dangerous. Not anger. Fury. But it wasn't aimed at her. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. From my best friend, Naomi snapped. The one person who actually cared enough to protect me. Dante went still. Isla, he said slowly. A hollow, disbelieving laugh escaped him. Naomi, he said, his voice roughening. She's been meeting with Marcus Thorne for months. The world stopped. What? I have pictures, Dante continued. Surveillance. I thought she was just a journalist chasing a story. He looked at her then, really looked. And I think, he said quietly, she just destroyed us both. Naomi's knees weakened. The lie she'd believed shattered around her. And something far worse began to take its place. Naomi didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, Isla's voice replayed in her head, gentle, concerned, devastatingly convincing. Every time she opened them, Dante's words echoed back with equal force. She's been meeting with Marcus Thorne. Two truths could not exist in the same space. One of them had to be a lie. At dawn, Naomi did the one thing she had avoided since this nightmare began. She looked for proof herself. Dante didn't stop her. He gave her access. That alone unsettled her more than any argument could have. His security system unfolded before her like a map of quiet horrors, timestamps, locations, faces captured in still frames so clear there was no room for denial. Isla sat across from Marcus Thorne in a private dining room. Isla entering Thorne Consolidated's offices. Isla leaving with a manila envelope tucked beneath her arm. Dates. Weeks. Months. Naomi's hands trembled as she scrolled. She came to me first, Dante said from behind her. Offered information. Your routines. Your family history. Your vulnerabilities. Naomi swallowed hard. Why? Dante exhaled slowly. Because Thorne promised her what I never could. Which is a seat at the table. The words hollowed something inside Naomi. All those years, late-night ramen, shared dreams, promises whispered between two girls who swore they'd rise together. Isla hadn't just betrayed her. She'd sold her. Naomi confronted Isla that afternoon. They met at the same cafe as before. The same burnt coffee. The same sticky tables. Isla smiled when she saw her, relief flashing briefly across her face. You look terrible, she said softly. I've been worried. Naomi placed her phone on the table and slid it forward. The images played silently. Isla's smile froze. The cafe noise faded into nothing. How long? Naomi asked quietly. Isla's shoulders slumped. I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered. It was supposed to be information. A story. Access. You told me he used me, Naomi said, her voice shaking. But it was you. Tears filled Isla's eyes, but Naomi noticed now how quickly they came, how carefully they fell. He would have destroyed you eventually, Isla said. I was trying to protect you. No, Naomi replied. You were trying to replace me. The silence between them was final. When Naomi walked away, she didn't look back. That night, she stood beside Dante on the balcony, the city spread beneath them like a living organism. I don't want to be part of your war, she said softly. Dante nodded. Then don't be. But I won't be used again, she continued. By anyone. Dante turned to her, his expression unguarded for the first time. Then stand with me, he said. Not behind me. Not because of me. But because you choose to. Naomi looked out at the city. She had been a pawn. A muse. A target. Now, she would be something else entirely. Naomi didn't answer Dante right away. Choice had always been a luxury she believed belonged to other people, people with money, power, safety nets. Her life had been shaped by survival, by reacting instead of deciding. But now, standing beside a man who ruled empires and a city that never slept, she understood something with startling clarity. Not choosing was still a choice. I'll stand with you, she said finally. But on my terms. Dante inclined his head. Not in dominance. In respect. Name them. Naomi took a breath. No secrets. Not the kind that decide my life without my consent. And I will not be used as bait. Ever again. Agreed, Dante said without hesitation. The war shifted that night. Naomi stopped being protected from information and started being included. She didn't sit in boardrooms or negotiate hostile takeovers, but she saw the patterns. The timing. The psychology behind every move. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a businessman. He was predictable. Arrogant. Image-obsessed. Addicted to control. And that addiction was his weakness. Naomi noticed things Dante's analysts dismissed. The way Thorne responded to public humiliation faster than financial loss. How he lashed out when narratives slipped from his grasp. He doesn't fear losing money, she said one evening, studying a series of press clippings. He fears losing the story. Dante looked at her sharply. Go on. So we stop attacking his assets, she continued. We attack his myth. The plan unfolded quietly. Strategically. A leaked interview here. A resurrected court filing there. A forgotten whistleblower given a platform. None of it illegal. All of it devastating. Thorne's image began to fracture. Questions replaced certainty. Doubt crept into boardrooms that had once welcomed him unquestioningly. And then came Isla. She tried to crawl back. Emails. Voicemails. Messages drenched in regret and desperation. I never meant for it to get this bad. He manipulated me. Please, Naomi. Talk to me. Naomi read none of them. She had learned the cost of letting people rewrite history. The final blow came not from Dante, but from Naomi herself. She agreed to exhibit her work publicly for the first time. The series was called Inheritance. It wasn't about wealth. It was about damage. About what powerful men left behind when they treated lives like collateral. The opening night was packed. So was Marcus Thorne. He stood frozen before one particular piece, a sprawling canvas of shadow and steel, of figures half erased beneath towering structures. The placard beside it read, "Dedicated to those who survived what could not be bought." Thorne left early. The next morning, his board called for his resignation. The game had changed. And Naomi had made the deciding move. Marcus Thorne disappeared from public life within weeks. No dramatic arrest. No courtroom spectacle. Just a quiet resignation, a sealed settlement, and a man who had once ruled headlines reduced to footnotes and whispers. His empire didn't collapse, it was absorbed, dismantled, redistributed by forces far more patient than revenge. Dante watched it happen from a distance. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt finished. The war that had shaped every decision, every sleepless night, every ruthless move, was over. And in its absence, there was an unsettling silence. The kind that demanded a reckoning. Naomi felt it too. Victory hadn't erased the past. It had only cleared space for something new. The loft no longer felt like a battlefield. Sunlight filled the rooms again. Paintings leaned against walls not as evidence, but as possibilities. Naomi worked differently now, less frantically, more deliberately. Her art no longer begged to be seen. It expected to be. One evening, as the city lights flickered on like a living constellation, Dante stood behind her while she painted. "You don't need me anymore," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Naomi set her brush down. "I never needed you to save me," she replied. "I needed you to stop deciding my worth for me." He nodded, accepting the truth of it. "I don't know how to be anything other than the man who fights," he admitted. "Revenge was my compass for so long. Without it, I'm untethered." Naomi turned to face him. "Then learn to build instead of destroy." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, not fragile. Honest. The next morning, Dante made a decision that shocked the city's financial elite. He stepped down as CEO. Not from ownership. From control. Sterling Holdings restructured, leadership redistributed, power diluted. It wasn't an act of charity, it was strategy. The kind that ensured no one man could turn an empire into a weapon again. The tabloids called it weakness. The markets called it stability. Naomi called it growth. Months later, the Vance Gallery opened quietly, no scandal, no spectacle. Just art, light, and truth. Critics came expecting a billionaire-backed vanity project. They left humbled. The work was raw. Commanding. Unapologetic. It spoke of betrayal without bitterness, of survival without glorification. It spoke of a woman who had been used, and refused to stay silent. On opening night, Dante didn't stand at the center of the room. He stood beside Naomi. Not as a savior. Not as a shield. But as a man who had learned to follow. When the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Naomi stood before the final piece in the gallery. A single canvas. A storm breaking into light. Dante slipped his hand into hers. "We didn't win the way I imagined," he said. Naomi smiled softly. "We won the way we needed to." Outside, the city roared on, indifferent, relentless, alive. Inside, something rare remained. Not revenge. Not power. Not forgiveness forced too soon. But choice. And the quiet understanding that the greatest masterpiece wasn't hanging on the wall. It was the life they had reclaimed, together, but never owned. This is Storyheart Studio. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories about love tested by betrayal, power, and impossible choices. And tell us in the comments, was Naomi's greatest strength her love, or her refusal to be owned? Your voice matters here.